media that's playing. Well, I guess some people have missed what I just talked about, but if you're just joining us, this is a talk about the media session API. Cool. So yeah, we just learned about one of the workarounds that people have used to bring some media information into outside of the frame. But now we have the media session API. So let's learn about how that works and how it can make websites a bit more interactive and a bit better of a user experience. So I've set up here a very basic, very ugly music player. So it's an HTML web page with only a few lines of code. And what we're doing here is we're including one MP3 file in an audio element. We have a play button, which again could use some styling, and we're including a script that we're calling mediasession.js. So the script also has almost nothing. All it does is it just adds a click handler to the button that we looked at earlier that will start playback of the audio element when it's tapped. So we're not using the media session API yet, but still when I tap on the play button, we can see that the browser has already inferred some information about what's going on here with the music. So we saw when we tapped on the play button, which I theoretically did between those two slides, that there is now a audio icon on the tab telling the user that this tab is actually playing some music. And we can also see with Chrome at least, that there's this new icon in the toolbar with a music note. And I'm kind of curious about that. So let's tap on that and see what that does. So this brings up a little user interface, little box that Chrome, I think they call it the Media Control Center. And so it has a pause icon. It identifies some information about the music that's playing. It gives us the URL, but it doesn't give us much else. So it's still pretty bare. It's still pretty undecorated in terms of telling the user about what song is actually playing. I still don't know that from this Media Control Center. And we're going to use the media session API to decorate it and to give it much more of a UX and make it more useful. And if we were to open that ugly web player in Chrome for Android, and if we were to start playing a track, and if we were to then lock our device, we would see something that looks like this. So it's very similar to the Chrome Media Control Center that we looked at just a moment ago, where there is some basic information about the song that's playing. We can see the URL. And I think if we had set a title element, which we didn't do, we would see at the title of the web page here, which also gives the user some information about what could be playing on their phone. But again, there's not a whole lot of information. And this Android lock screen and the Chrome Media Control Center that we looked at earlier, these are kinds of surfaces that the specification, the standard, calls platforms. So let's start building out the media session API and start using it to display information on those platforms, those surfaces we were just looking at. I'm going to update mediasession.js to add some new information here, where we're going to be defining a media metadata object. And so the three kind of most basic metadata fields that are supported by this API are the title of the song, the artist, and also the album. And we're going to take that object and we're going to assign it to the navigator media session object here, the metadata object, to tell the browser, hey, we're playing some music, and here's some information about it that you can use to then pass to the underlying platforms that are going to consume it. But as we'll talk about, some browsers still don't support the media session API. So I'm also going to add a couple lines of code here, just one really line of code to check to see if any function of the media session API is supported. And that's a good idea because, like I said, not all browsers are going to support this API yet. One thing I think is kind of interesting about this API is that the properties here of the metadata are kind of oriented around music. So title, artist, album, those are kinds of metadata that you would kind of associate with a song. But when I was going through the specification, the standard, I noticed that one of their examples is actually a podcast. So it's kind of implied in the standard that maybe you could use the title, the album, or the artist to mean things other than just music necessarily. Maybe there's other kinds of media that we could pass metadata about to the browser. Wow, okay, so the Android lock screen for our ugly web player, it looks a whole lot better now. It's got a whole lot more information about what's actually being played than it did before. So with those few lines of code, we've actually created a pretty cool, I think, integration into a surface where maybe the user wouldn't have expected to actually get information about their music before. We can now see that the lock screen, even though I'm just playing a website, it's not a native app, I can see the title of the song that's playing, I can see the artist, and that's a whole lot more than what we had before. So it's a lot better of a user experience, I think, than what we had previously. And it's much richer even than what is even available in the frame, where we don't have information about the title of the song or the artist yet. And if we go back to our Chrome Media Control Center, it shows up there too. In fact, the Control Center shows an extra field that we didn't see on the lock screen, which is the album string, which we passed, but wasn't shown on the lock screen in Android. It is shown on this Media Control Center. And these are just examples of platforms where this data can show up. I keep finding the more I test out this API, the more platforms and places where this metadata shows up in the operating system, I keep finding them. And it seems like each platform can have a slightly different way of interpreting the metadata and presenting the metadata that it's receiving. So there are differences between these services when they receive that data. And we can even pass along artwork to the media metadata object. And this is really exciting too, because it makes it more visual. It's not just text you're going to see on the lock screen. Soon we're also going to see an image that you could associate with the media that's playing. And in this case, we're passing an array of artwork. So we're going to pass more than one size of artwork. And the benefit here is that the platform can actually choose the artwork size that works best for that platform. So if you are targeting a specific platform, if there's a particular place like a lock screen where you do want to particularly show media metadata, then you could test out different sizes of artwork and target the correct size, the best size maybe for your platform. Wow, okay, much success. So now the Android lock screen actually shows an image along with the title and the artist. So this is a big win, I think. I think it's made my website, my humble website, a whole lot richer in terms of user experience. By the way, this is a placeholder image. I didn't have the album art for this song, but it's a much richer user experience than anything in the frame of the web page right now. And it might be surprising to the user that we actually have such a rich integration already just from playing a web page. So we can take this further by adding controls. And this is another part of this API that I think is super exciting. We can tell the media session API that our application is able to handle certain actions that the underlying platforms could pass up to us. So in order to do that, we're going to use the set action handler method of Navigator media session. And the first argument here is the type of action that we're going to tell the browser that we're able to handle in our application. And in this case, it's going to be the next track action, which is probably one of the most popular actions you're going to need if you're going to build an app like this, because it's really useful, like we talked about earlier, for headphones. But you can even use it in software platforms too, like the Media Control Center that we'll look at in just a moment. And once we do define this action handler, we actually see that there's a new button now on the lock screen that wasn't there before. So previously we didn't have that next track button. It didn't show up on the lock screen. But even though we don't have any code here that handles this next track action, the button's already there. So just by defining this set action handler, we have triggered the Android lock screen to display this new button. And if the user taps on it, then our application can handle that action through some code we could define here. So it's pretty key to remember that our application is responsible for actually doing the work to go to the next track or handle any other action. So it won't happen automatically. We would have to actually write code here to do that. And it's equally important, I think, to remember not to register action handlers that maybe your application isn't prepared to handle, because we don't want the user to have an experience where they see a next track button, but it doesn't work or they can't use it. And we can even implement seek controls. And there's actually a range of action handlers for seek. I'll just talk about one of them for today, which is seek forward. So this is intended to help the user skip forward a small amount within the song. And it can come with an offset. So the platform can pass to our application a certain number of seconds that they want to offset this seek forward by, or seek backwards if we were to use seek backwards. So it can pass that in options, the second argument to the action handler, or it can actually not provide a seek forward offset. And if an offset isn't provided, then the specification advises us to skip forward a sensible amount, they say. So I don't know what that is, but it could be 10 seconds or 15 seconds in the case of music. And this is visible in Chrome too. So in the Chrome Media Control Center that we were talking about earlier, again, this is just one example of a platform. We can see now that this has triggered the platform to show a new button, the seek forward button, making this a much richer user experience than I think it was at the start, where we had only a pause button and very little information about the media that was playing. And so there's many, many other controls that are actually supported by this API. I haven't tested all of them out yet, but some of them are designed for, I think, video calling apps. So we have controls here for things like toggle microphone, toggle camera, and hang up, which I think is pretty interesting. I haven't tested to see how these UI, how these controls actually appear on, for example, Android, but it's pretty fascinating that they were thinking about this in the standard when they were developing it. We have one here for skip ad. So a skip specific to ads if the user is done hearing the ad they're listening to. I think that's pretty fascinating. And then there's a couple of here for previous slide and next slide, I suppose, for an application that handles presenter notes or for presentations online. So they thought about a lot when they were developing this standard. And I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here in terms of bringing those controls onto platforms. So the big question, I think, for a lot of JavaScript developers might be, when can I actually use this API? Because there's plenty of cool APIs, but some of them are not widely supported. So I think this is why I wanted to talk about it, because usage, according to caniuse.com, usage is now up to 92% of global users have a browser that can support some of these metadata and controls. So that's actually, I mean, it's not nothing. And it's implemented in the latest versions of Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and iOS Safari, and Chrome for Android too, like we were just looking at earlier. Important to note, though, that support in the browser doesn't mean that the browser is going to show a platform UX, a platform user interface like Chrome did. I think Chrome's Media Control Center, as far as I know, it's not in many other browsers. So Firefox may not have something like that, but Firefox would still pass to the underlying platform those actions and that metadata so that other, maybe the operating system or maybe the devices that are connected could use it. Another situation to consider here is the situation when many songs are playing. If a user is browsing the web a lot, they might have more than one tab that's got multiple media sessions at the same time. And that's where it can get a little bit complicated, I think. you can't really control mini sessions from a simple headphone forwards, backwards skip button. That would be difficult to do. So the standard, the specification recommends that the browser picks one and defines it as the active media session based on a preferred user experience. So it's still fairly vague in the standard about that, but they do refer to a newer API that's still in development that might offer more guidance on audio focus. Cool. So we've talked about this API a bit. I want to show you how it actually works with a device. So I bought this very cheap Bluetooth speaker, and I'm going to connect it to my laptop, and we'll see if it can actually skip a song like we were talking about. And to do this, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to share my whole screen so that you can see the code that I'm working on. But first, I'm going to turn on this cheap little speaker. I'm sorry, people outside the room, you won't be able to see this, but I'm holding a very cheap, small Bluetooth speaker, and it's just turned on. And I'm going to connect it to my Mac so that the audio from my Mac is going to be played out into the speaker. Okay, so I think it's connected to my Mac now, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the code that I'm working with. Cool. So I have Visual Studio Code opened here. And we have, again, a very simple music player, a lot like the one we were just looking at. Very little styling, no styling. And the key difference here is that there's now 2 songs. So we had only 1 song earlier, but now I've got a blues song and a ragtime song. So there's more than one audio element on the same page. And when I go over to Media Session.js, there's been a lot more changes here. So we've set up an array here of songs. If you were building maybe a playlist type of app, maybe this could be something like a playlist. And so this identifies the 2 songs that we had on the page. It has their IDs for elements so that I know which one to play. And it has the title of each song. Just to keep the code short, I'm not going to include album art or other metadata for today. We'll just keep the title as the only metadata that we pass to the Media Session API to keep it simple. And I've created functions here to play a track in the playlist and to pause a track in the playlist. So these functions can just start and stop the playback of audio. Nothing. The only specific thing here to Media Session API is that when we play a track, we are going to be setting the media metadata title to the song title of the current track in the playlist. So again, we have a click handler just to play the current song in the playlist. So when I tap the play button on this ugly web page, it will start playing the first song on the playlist. And from there, we're setting an action handler to tell the browser that playing the next track, when this Bluetooth speaker tells the Media Session API to play the next track, we want to pause playback of the current song in the playlist and then play the next track on our tiny playlist of two songs. So let's test it out and see if it actually works. Okay, hopefully my speaker is still connected. And I'm going to tap the play first song button. So it's started playing the first song in our playlist. but we haven't really tested the media session API out yet. One thing I will point out though is that in my Mac, there's a little play icon here. Actually, it didn't seem to pass along the title this time, but in the past, it has passed on. The title can show up here. I must have had a bug in my app code for today, but this is another use case for the media session API where metadata can show up. So hopefully my bug did not extend to skipping, because now I'm going to try skipping this track to the next track in the playlist and see if this control on this Bluetooth speaker will actually skip to the next song just from a website. Okay, I'm going to refresh the page and see if it works then. There we go. Okay. Please clap. So double tapping on the Bluetooth speaker did play the next track on our little playlist. Thank you to the media session API for doing that. And so, yeah, the media session API, again, just to recap, it's a cool way, I think, of making your websites that play music a lot more rich and a lot better of a user experience. No, and that's still broken, but yeah, like I said, the Apple Center here can also display media session API content in some cases. And yeah, that's my presentation.
So thank you, Josh. Very inspiring talk. A lot of try at home. And do you have any question?
Hello. So you have all the songs in your system right now, correct? They're all stored in your system. Yeah, but does Spotify have any open web API so that we can connect to it and then directly stream songs from there?
Yes, so sorry, Spotify does have an SDK called the Web Playback SDK, which you can use to stream audio from Spotify's catalog when you're signed in as a Spotify premium user. So we didn't focus on that in this talk, but Spotify does have an SDK for streaming audio in the browser. Thank you for the opportunity to plug it.
Thank you for presentation. In real world, I expect that any song have its own metadata built in the song, including picture, yeah, in ID3 or like that. And this API described that my browser should get this information from JavaScript. Yeah, so it should be realized inside the page. Yeah, to extract the data from metadata from the media and bring it to the player, or it can be just be there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So where does the metadata come from? So the metadata is not plucked from the file. The application can provide it and could set it to whatever it wants it to be. And that's one thing I think, again, is very interesting about the specification in the standard is that they did have an example in the standard of a podcast episode where I think they set the artist to the podcaster rather than a musician. So there's a lot of diversity there and potentially in media formats that could be using this API, even though the properties seem to be associated with music. And it's not plucked from the song. Your app would have to provide it.
Just curious, is media session that standard will support video in future, or like just that's it, video?
I personally have not tested it with video. So I don't know if it will or can support video. But like I mentioned, some of the controls are kind of geared for a video calling app. So the hang up control, the microphone on, I think, control, those ones seem to be more geared for like a video type of calling situation. But I personally have not tested those controls myself.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh, for your presentation. Was very impressive. I personally use these apps day in, day out. I'm just curious, are there any major headphone manufacturers out there adapting this type of API to enhance the user experience? For the folks who are into the sound production, we're very into our personalized sound reference, for example. So are there any trend you can see that's coming down in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I think I was curious about this too when I was building this presentation, kind of which hardware devices, how much are they going to support control of that's compatible with the web, with the media session API. And I'm not privy to any kind of trends in terms of the hardware, but I hope definitely that, you know, headphones will have those kinds of controls. And I found, like, I was surprised actually that this device did support skip. I didn't know that it would. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the trends will be, but I think it's already compatible with a lot of different devices that do already have a skip function, for example, and are connected by USB or by, in this case, Bluetooth.
Hey, so I was wondering, are the action handlers exclusive to like the functionality, the buttons that they've already created, or can you do custom buttons? Because maybe it's a little bit strange, but my brain's kind of going towards like, what if you could input like MIDI options or your own buttons on a device that you've created?
Yeah, so that's a super good question. So we're talking about the platform controls. Can we customize those platform controls? And the media session API does not provide a way for the web developer to pass down, for example, an icon or an image to customize the look or feel of that icon. It's kind of on the platform developer, like the developer of Android's lock screen, to come up with those icons and choose what they want to support, if any. So no, I guess the answer is no from the media session API, but maybe there's other ways, like through a native app, you could build what you wanted to build.
Anyone else? No. So thank you, Josh. Very great talk. And here's your hoodie.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's the size. Yeah, check the size. We have an M. Okay, perfect. That's perfect.